Thank you, Lance. So a lot of what I'm going to say and what Lance just said is kind of intertwined. I'm Josh German. Today I'm going to talk about insurance your contractor needs to have before you allow them onto your property. You should be talking with your attorney and your insurance agent before you sign painting contracts, landscape contracts, solar installations, re-roofing, repiping, and, renovations of common areas, anything like that. The point of this presentation is to provide enough information so you have a basic knowledge of insurance as it relates to construction issues. But really, I want to stress that if you have a big project, you need to seek professional help. I'm going to go over some exclusions on the commercial general liability policy and the differences in policy wording. Other coverages I'll talk about include auto, work comp, umbrella, and professional liability. And then briefly, I'm going to talk about licensing and bonding. The commercial general liability policy covers your liability for bodily injury and property damage to third parties. Basically, it's when you hurt someone or you damage someone else's stuff. For contractors, it also covers their products and completed operations. In other words, construction defects. A construction defect is generally defined as a defect in the design, the workmanship, and/or in the materials or systems used on a project that results in a failure of a component part of a building or structure and causes damage to a person or property, usually resulting in financial harm to the owner. So damage resulting from a contractor's poor workmanship is covered, but the poor workmanship itself is not covered. That's a warranty item that Lance talked about and should be addressed in your contract. Coming up on the slides, there are going to be screenshots of policy language. You probably can't read the wording, and that was done on purpose. Don't try to focus on the wording. It's really boring. If you need to sleep at night, take an Ambien. Don't read insurance policies. Insurance policy forms are generally standardized by the insurance services offices. I'm going to call them ISO. They're based in New Jersey. They create standard policy forms. Most insurance companies take these forms and tweak them. They add coverage, take away coverage, whatever they feel they need to do to be competitive. This here is the standard ISO language for the pollution exclusion, and it's 675 words used to say you don't have much coverage for bodily injury or property damage arising out of a pollutant, with some exceptions for building, heating equipment, fuels and lubricants in mobile equipment, and hostile fire. The next exclusion is the lead exclusion. Old buildings have lead paint. Insurance companies don't want anything to do with that. Your remediation contractor should have pollution coverage because they sometimes need to remove and dispose of building materials that contain lead. So hire a good construction manager to help you identify if you have this exposure. Next is the asbestos exclusion. Examples of where you'd see asbestos in buildings could be floor tiles, ceiling tiles, insulation, and even the joint compound used in seams between pieces of sheetrock. Hire a good construction manager to help you identify if you have this exposure. Next is the professional liability exclusion. There's a separate policy for professional liability. It's an E&O policy. They don't want to cover it on the GL policy. So examples of contractors that have this exposure are primarily design-build contractors and contractors building new buildings. Common issues would be water that we've seen have been water penetration and sound attenuation. This sounds kind of weird, but there's actually a new building in Kaka'ako on Oahu. Has an issue where the wind blows through the building and causes a lot of noise. There's whirring, the windows vibrate, and they can even make loud popping sounds. So they have a professional liability case going on there right now. Again, a good construction manager can help you to determine if your contractor should have this coverage. The next exclusion is my least favorite of all. It's the multifamily residential construction exclusion. The wording varies by insurance company, but this is a very bad exclusion. It pretty much excludes all coverage for work done in condos, and it's on a lot of contractors' general liability policies. Some companies don't want to cover the potential loss times however many units there are where the contractor could potentially make the same mistake over and over and use the same faulty materials. So when a contractor wants to do a job at a condo, this exclusion requires the contractor's insurance agent to approach the underwriter and get a carve-out for your project. For this, we want you to ask the contractor for a copy of the actual endorsement adding back the coverage for your project. A simple certificate of insurance does not guarantee that the contractor's insurance agent went back to the carrier and got approval for them to do your job. Additional insured status. There are 2 AI forms that you'd primarily be concerned with. It's the CG 2010, which is for ongoing operations, and the CG 2037, which is for completed work. With both forms, you'd want primary and non-contributory status. In addition, you'd want a waiver of subrogation. What does this mean? Well, primary and non-contributory means the contractor's insurance is primary, they pay first, and your insurance doesn't contribute. A waiver of subrogation means they won't come back and sue you after the fact. Older forms of the CG 2010 and 2037 are from September 2004. These were good forms. Most companies now use newer forms. They're dated April 2013 and are an attempt by the insurance industry to limit their exposure and to encourage good contract language. They want you to use Lance to create a good contract. But people haven't done that, and yeah, I'll get into that later. The 2013 versions read, if coverage to the additional insured is required by a contractor agreement, the most the insurer will pay on behalf of the additional insured is the amount of insurance required by the contract. This can limit coverage. For example, the contractor has $1 million GL policy with a $5 million umbrella. You require $1 million limit in the contract. The contractor somehow causes a $3 million loss, burns down a building or something. These new forms will limit your coverage to just $1 million, even though the contractor has more insurance and could pay for the loss. The ideal solution would be to ask for the older policy forms. However, that's becoming increasingly more difficult because companies are phasing out the old forms. On the next slide, I've included some sample contract language. I didn't run it by Lance, I probably should have. Hopefully he doesn't have a problem with my language. But this is to overcome the limitations for the 2013 ISO forms. You should ask the contractor to use the language shown here in their contract with your association. So the language says the contractor and its subcontractors of any tier shall obtain and maintain in full force and effect the following insurances with limits which will be the greater of those specified in this agreement, the contractor's actual insurance policy limits, or those limits required by law. So this states that even if your contract, it says they must maintain a $1 million limit, you can still go after them for their full policy limits, I believe. ISO issues changes as a reaction to loopholes discovered in case law like this one. ISO has recognized this loophole in their form and is working on revisions to the form to be released later this year and hopefully adopted by insurance carriers shortly after that. Okay, next we have the change in occurrence definition. This is a Hawaii state-specific form, and I'm going to tell you why in just a second. Occurrence means an accident, including continuous or repeated exposure to substantially the same general harmful conditions. The background behind this is there was a lawsuit decision on May 19th, 2010 involving mold at the Hilton Kalia Tower on Oahu. The mold occurred over time and there were multiple claims filed. Because it wasn't clear when the loss occurred, claims were filed with multiple insurance carriers. Tradewind Insurance settled with the contractor and tried to recover some of their payment from Admiral Insurance. The State Intermediate Court of Appeals ruled that construction defect claims do not constitute an occurrence under the commercial general liability policy. So this was a shocking ruling, and overnight, faulty workmanship by contractors was no longer covered. Without this change in occurrence definition form here, that if you get it from insurance from a company that does business in Hawaii, they're gonna have this on here, because it's pretty standard in Hawaii. But without this change in occurrence definition, a construction defect won't trigger coverage on the policy. The insurance industry responded quickly by making amendments like this change in occurrence definition, so that the court's decision wouldn't apply, since it was the intent of most insurance companies to cover. It's been over 9 years, and the companies that want to cover construction defects have since changed their forms. The likely problem can arise when your associations hire mainland contractors and they're not familiar with Hawaii. It's not that they're bad, they just, they may not have this change in occurrence definition, and they need this if they're doing business in Hawaii. Now I'm going to go over the policy limits on your normal CGL policy. These policy limits have been standard since 1988 and probably need to be updated, but until they do get updated, we have umbrella policies that will provide excess coverage. The general aggregate is the most that will be paid in a policy year for bodily injury or property damage on your premises. The general aggregate can be on a per project, per policy, or per location basis. Ideally, you want per project from your contractors. The products and completed operations aggregate, that's the most that will be paid in a policy year for damage to policy of others arising out of the insured's product or work. Personal and advertising injury, associations usually aren't worried about that. That's libel, slander, invasion of privacy, and copyright infringement. The each occurrence limit applies to all bodily injury and property damage claims. We already went over the definition of occurrence. Damage to rented premises is if your association rents a room like this for the annual meeting, and a fight breaks out and you cause damage, you have coverage there. The medical expense limit. This is goodwill coverage for bodily injury accidents regardless of fault. The next slide is just a recap of the things we went over. I only have 20 minutes, so I have to move quickly. Let's go through an example. This is supposed to be a picture of our office building in Honolulu. It's a commercial condo. There are tree trimmers outside the building, and they have the street coned off where they're working. There's a guy in a cherry picker up there cutting down the palm fronds, and a guy down below on the sidewalk stopping pedestrians while he's cutting and telling them to stop cutting when the pedestrians need to pass through. If someone gets injured by a falling palm frond, they will go after the tree trimmers and the association whose property they were injured on. So if the contractor has a CG 2010 form that we talked about, they're protected if they injure someone with a falling palm frond during their ongoing operations. If they have the 2037, they're also protected if a week later a palm frond falls on a pedestrian because the tree trimmer should have cut it down. The primary and non-contributory language protects the association because you want the contractor's insurance to pay first and not have them ask for contribution from your insurance. The waiver of subrogation in your favor will mean they don't come after you after the fact. I mean, maybe they might claim that the loss occurred because you told them to park in a certain spot and they couldn't see the pedestrians coming around the corner, and that's why the palm frond fell on them. Coverage, you want to be on a per project general aggregate basis because these guys could be trimming trees all over town and injuring people all over the place, and they may give you a certificate of insurance that says they have 1 million, 2 million limits, and actually that limit is all eroded, paying all their claims all around town. If you have per project, that protects you. So now let's go through the other insurance policies your contractor should have. Business auto coverage. $1 million bodily injury per person, $1 million bodily injury per accident, and $1 million property damage per accident limits are best. A $1 million combined single limit is okay because most of the umbrella policies will provide excess above either one of these limit structures. The workers' compensation policy has two parts. The first part is the statutory coverage that pays medical expenses and lost wages. This coverage has no limit because the state wants employees to be protected on the job. The employer's liability section covers pain and suffering and the loss of consortium or the inability to have normal relationship with family. The 500,000, 500,000, 500,000 limits shown here are what you want to see that the contractor has, because most umbrella policies will provide excess coverage above these limits. It is also extremely important for you to get additional insured status with a waiver of subrogation on the work comp policy. As an example for this one, I'm going to use a different example. Ignore the picture there. Something I just heard at the CAI law seminar last week. Someone talked about this same subject, but they had an hour. I only have 20 minutes. He's a condo insurance agent that lives in Florida. One of his clients had landscapers on the property, and one of the guys was trimming a hedge with one of those big hedge trimmers, making it nice and flat. He was going along, tripped in a hole, fell down, cut off 2 of his fingers. The landscape contractor's work comp carrier took care of the guy's medical bills, lost wages, and probably paid him a bunch of money for the fingers he lost. Then the carrier realized they didn't give the association a waiver of subrogation, so they went after the association and the general liability insurance carrier to recover the amount they paid for this guy's injuries. This was a really unfortunate thing for the association, because if they had properly transferred the risk to the landscaper, they wouldn't have this huge general liability claim on their loss runs, and they wouldn't have skyrocketing insurance rates. The umbrella policy should be following form excess coverage above the general liability, the business auto, and the employer's liability policies. Consider the job the contractor's doing for you when you, and the maximum potential for damage they can cause to your buildings and other people when you determine the umbrella limit that you're going to require this guy to have. Some common board of directors mistakes. Not verifying who's insuring the materials in transit, off the job site, and while on the job site. Those are 3 different things that need to be specified. Responsibility for materials at different stages should be outlined in the contract. Not verifying if the contractor has the correct lines of insurance and limits, and not verifying if the contractor has the proper endorsements and coverage enhancements. Please have your attorney and your insurance agent review your contracts before you sign them. If you send it to us after, we can't help you. Additional non-insurance mistakes that are made. Not hiring a construction manager and letting him or her lead the process. If you have a big job, hire a professional to manage it for you. Don't think that you can manage it yourself. Also, having too many chiefs. Associations are notorious for governance by the many and having many experts on the board. You guys are all experts, right? You need to resist the know-it-all approach and hire professionals. Licensing and bonding. Licensed contractor has training, insurance, and can obtain building permits. The DCCA Regulated Industries Complaints Office requires any project over $1,500 labor and materials to be done with licensed contractors. Also, plumbing and electrical work must always be done by the licensed contractor. I know you guys like to hire handymen, so do I, but I don't run a condominium association. Bonding. A bond is guaranteed by a third party that ensures the contractor's obligation will be fulfilled. 3 parties to a bond, you guys can read. There are 2 types of bonds. I think Lance went over this. The performance bond ensures that the contractor will complete the job. It'll pay up to the penal sum of the contract amount. Usually you won't be out the entire amount because progressive payments throughout the course of construction can reduce your risk on this. A payment bond is a guarantee that the contractor will pay its subcontractors and suppliers. Typical cost for bonding is about 1 to 3% of the contract price. When is bonding needed? You should check your association's governing documents to see if there is a bond requirement. Check it, before you go into this, so if you want to amend your governing documents, you have time before you need to do the construction project. If there's a loan involved with the construction project, the bank might require a bond. The next 2 are kind of subjective items, how large is a large project, but, you know, if you're repiping a 30-story building, it's costing you $10 million, you probably want to get a bond. So some takeaways: please consult with professionals when engaging with a contractor. Like Lance said, the contract is not going to be in your best interest, so you got to go back with revisions. Hire a construction consultant, talk to your attorney and your insurance agent. A well-written contract protects both the association and the contractor. Contracts are not one size fits all. And that's it. Thank you all for coming.